Between the Rows is brought to you by Smart Nutrition MAP plus MST. Experience the latest, most efficient fertilizer system for delivering sulfur and phosphate to your crops when they need it. Learn how to boost your soil's performance and maximize ROI with Smart Nutrition MAP plus MST at smartnutritionmst.com.
Hello and welcome to a special Coping with COVID edition of Between the Rows. I'm your host this week, Gord Gilmour. With the prospect of a long and isolated winter looming, we're delving into how we can all make the best of it and perhaps even find a bit of joy and fulfillment. A bit later in the show, we'll be speaking to the organizer of one of the few farm events that's still happening this winter. And we'll talk to a representative of the Saskatchewan Farm Stress Line about what they've been seeing and some coping strategies for this winter. And of course, Glenn Halleck of Markets Farm will give us our usual market update. But first, here's Geraldine Witchers, a reporter with the Manitoba Co-operator. She's been researching and writing about the longer and more isolated winter than usual that lays ahead for all of us. Geraldine, thanks for joining us today.
Hey Gord, glad to join you again.
So, has it been a lonelier summer for farmers and other rural folks this year?
Well, I don't want to presume to speak for all farmers or everyone who lives in rural areas, but what we do know is that a lot of community events have been canceled and options for entertainment have been pretty limited. I spoke to Heather in Pilot Mound, and back in December, I was there when they celebrated the grand opening of a brand new community-run movie theater, and then just a few months later, it had to close. And there aren't that many options for entertainment out there. So that was definitely a blow, not to mention the fact that they'd been working so hard for so long to open this theater. I spoke to Paul, who farms in the Fisher Branch area, and he told me about how his neighbor had died. And they couldn't have a funeral at the time, or it had to be very small, so he couldn't go. And for him, that was hard because there wasn't a lot of closure. Here he had this good neighbor who just sort of vanished from his life. And then Neil, who farms near Minnedosa, said that summer was lonelier than usual because his friends and neighbors had varying levels of comfort when it came to hanging out together. And that area was also under an orange level restriction for a while. So he just plain saw fewer people. And then there were all these community fairs and rodeos that didn't happen. Even though I know that some communities got creative and did other things. But at very least, we know it's been a very different sort of summer and it's taken a lot of adaptation.
Yeah, of course. So do we know anything about how farmers' mental health is going?
Well, I spoke to Elaine Fraze, who is a speaker and a farm transition and personal coach in the Bois de Vain area. And she told me what she's seeing is that whatever pre-existing conditions were there in a family dynamic, those have been amplified. And this has included mental health issues, in some cases that were bad and now have turned malicious. And she's also had conversations with suicidal farmers. This was related to farm transition because that's what she does. But these are not conversations that she's typically had, is what she said. And unfortunately, she's also seen and heard of more people getting divorced. I spoke to Janet Smith, who's the manager of Manitoba Farm Rural and Northern Support Services helpline. And she says they have been seeing a steady increase in calls to the helpline, but she can't specifically tie that to COVID-19. That hotline also went to 24/7 recently, so that might account for some of that. And in some ways, she said this hasn't been a bad year for farming, at least not for the crop side of things. We didn't have that harvest from hell that we had last year, which probably helps with the outlook. But again, Janet said that if a person was already under stress, the pandemic might be the last straw.
And what did these experts have to say about preparing for the coming winters, perhaps looming winters, a better way of looking at it?
Yeah. Well, Elaine broke it down for me in 3 C's. And the first one was communication. And this came down to communicating with your family. What do you want this winter to look like? What are you and your family going to rally around? And to actually give this some thought. So maybe you can't go to Mexico or you can't go to Brandon for egg days, whatever your speed is as far as travel. But what can you do? Like, what projects can you take on? Can you go to a resort nearby? Can you take up snowshoeing or cross-country skiing or snowmobiling or something along that lines? And this is also a time to talk about what you want your farm to look like in the next decade. Elaine is a farm transition coach, but she didn't say this outright, but I think she might be trying to say that this might be the winter where you finally have time to work on that plan. The next C was celebration, celebrating small things. And her example to me was recently that she and her husband had enjoyed just an ordinary visit with another couple, and they had eaten grapes together, and it was just lovely. And she was trying to say that there are ways to have celebrations even with good safety protocols in place. It's not an all or nothing deal. And lastly, connectedness, finding ways to connect with your community and with each other. What she said to me was, use your phone as an actual phone. She said, write that down, use your phone as an actual phone. And she also talked about having Zoom conversations with a friend in Berlin, and also about how a local business in Boissevain had put together a farm equipment parade for the kids. Just recognizing that there are many ways to be connected, and you can still make use of those. And in terms of mental health, Janet Smith encouraged people to be very aware of their own stress tipping points, and also the tipping points in their loved ones, and respond to those things before it becomes a full-blown crisis. And some of that will just be doing things that fill your tank when you're getting low. And also just like reaching out. If those coping mechanisms aren't working anymore, or you have to pile mechanisms upon mechanisms, then talk to someone. And if you can't talk to a friend or your partner, maybe you don't want to burden with them with that, then therapists and counselors are wonderful for just sort of unraveling what's in your brain. I can say that from personal experience. And in here also in Manitoba, there's the Manitoba Farm, Rural, and Northern Support Line, where you can call in 24/7 now and speak to a counselor for free. And they won't judge you, they don't know you, and they'll just listen because that's their job.
That's great advice. I totally concur with that, and I share your history of having used those tools myself, and to good effect. I think a former RCMP officer that I know quite well once suggested I go seek some counseling for some personal issues, and I said that he was an unlikely advocate of mental health resources, and he just smiled and said to me, "Well, if I broke my leg, I wouldn't try and set it myself."
That's very true. Very true. It's scary for the first half an hour or so, and then it gets easier.
So, Geraldine, have you thought about what you're going to do with your winter?
Yes. And I admit it's not always easy to do or to feel enthusiastic about those sort of alternative plans. But I'm trying to look at it from a what will I want to have accomplished come spring standpoint. And so one of the things I definitely want to do is more outdoor cooking. A couple of times this year, I've taken out the cast iron and I made a fire and cooked tacos, and those were delicious, but I want to get even more creative. I'm also on a good streak of being active, and I want to keep that up. So I've already signed up for a winter 10K, and hopefully I don't regret that.
Well, that sounds like great plans. I think I'm going to try winter camping this year. I was already talking to my brother about it and maybe getting him off the farm for a couple of days to do something. So I think there's a lot of that happening for sure this winter.
Yeah. And a little creativity and we'll make it happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks so much, Geraldine, for taking the time to tell us about this.
Yeah, my pleasure.
That was Geraldine Witchers of the Manitoba Co-operator telling us about a story that's going to be appearing in their November 5th edition. You're listening to a special Coping with COVID edition of Between the Rows, the podcast of Glacier FarmMedia. I'm your host this week, Gord Gilmour. Later, we'll be speaking with an organizer of a farm event that's going ahead next month in Red Deer with abundant precautions for exhibitors and attendees. And Glenn Halleck of Markets Farm will give us a commodity update. But first, here's Jan Thorson of Mobile Crisis Services. They operate Saskatchewan's farm stress line, and she'll be telling us about what they've been observing through the COVID crisis. Jan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Gord. I'm delighted to be here.
So, are you observing a spike in calls due to the COVID pandemic?
Well, we haven't run our hard statistical numbers yet, but anecdotally, yes, we feel we've seen a bit of a spike. Summer's always a bit of a slower time anyway for the farm stress line because, of course, people are busy. But yes, we think that COVID has indeed increased our traffic to some degree.
And in particular, are farmers a bit more vulnerable to this because they're already somewhat isolated, and this is just sort of exacerbating that natural tendency?
I think that's true. Many farmers have great coping mechanisms, and because they live in a kind of an isolated lifestyle, many of them do very well. But this is a different kind of isolation. This is forced isolation, and that's always a different kettle of fish. So yes, I think it has a more profound impact.
And now, speaking of coping strategies, that brings me to my next question for you as a mental health professional. Can you recommend any coping strategies for the coming, what's likely to be a long and kind of lonely winter for all of us?
Right. Well, Gord, I'm very glad you asked because I do have some for you. I have 5. And I think they're probably applicable to anyone, but hopefully particularly for the farming community. The first one is to make a plan to get through the winter. Plan ahead. Plan some things ahead that will be fun. If you're able to organize a Zoom meeting with family once a week or friends, make sure that you have the things in the house that you need so that you can go for long walks, for example, or spend more time outside with family so you can visit in a safe way. Make a plan to get through the winter, and that kind of brings me into the second point is take some time to review how you coped the first time we were locked down. Some things will have worked for people, some things won't. Try to do a bit of an assessment and write it down. What worked for you and what didn't work for you? Certainly, just using myself as an example, eating a lot of chocolate didn't work so well for me. Not going to do it this winter. So try to figure out what made you feel better about things, what didn't work, and then make a plan to integrate those positive things into your winter plan and try to eliminate some of those negative ones. The third thing is, this is a hard one for all of us, but really try not to focus on the isolation. Try to focus on this is an opportunity for you to do different things, try different things. Spend some time doing those things that you've always wanted to do. For example, if you've always wanted to learn Italian, maybe it's a good time to pick up some tapes and practice your Italian. Just, make some time for yourself. Make some time to do things that will make you happy and make you feel good. The fourth thing is talk to people. Talk to your family, talk to your friends. Talk as often as you can to as many people and talk about how you're feeling. And then listen to your friends and family and hear how they're feeling. I do some training with first responders, and the one thing I really try to emphasize with them is always there's nothing wrong with talking about your feelings. You can't ever hurt anyone with that. Just tell people how you feel, how you genuinely feel, and sometimes just saying those things out loud lightens that burden for you to some extent, but not always. So the fifth thing, reach out for professional help if you feel you need it, or you want it, or you just want someone to check in with you to make sure you're on track. Our office runs the Farm Stress Line. Our number is available to people 24 hours a day. Just phone and check in with us. And if you feel you need more help than that, we can make referrals for you. There's lots of resources across the country. I know you have some links that people can follow up on. Follow up on that and get some professional help.
And actually, that leads me to my final question, and that is, are farmers and their families, are they good at reaching out for help when they needed it, or is this something that the agriculture community could perhaps look at to improve upon?
I think they're getting better at it. I think for a long time there was a stigma and people felt that they had to suffer in silence, but I think more and more people understand that that's not the case. It's the old saying, if you had a broken leg, would we stop and have a debate about getting help? No, we'd go straight to the emergency room. And I think people are more and more feeling that yes, you can get help for mental health and it can get better. You can cope better, you can feel better. And I think calling crisis lines is a very good way to start. It's safe, no one's judging you, and they can help you make a decision about reaching out and help you find somewhere to reach out to.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today and letting us know about this.
Gord, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
That was Jan Thorson of the Saskatchewan Farm Stress Line telling us about some potential coping strategies for the coming winter. You're listening to a special Coping with COVID edition of Between the Rows. I'm your host this week, Gord Gilmour. We'll wrap the show up a bit later with our usual market report from Glenn Halleck of Markets Farm. But first, we're joined by Jeremy Maciejewski of Thunderstruck Agricultural Marketing. While bigger shows like Ag Days and Ag in Motion have been forced to cancel, his organization is forging ahead with a smaller and more intimate event in Red Deer, November 11th and 12th. He joins us now to tell us how they'll pull that off and why farmers are happy for the chance for a safe way to get off the farm. Jeremy, thanks for being here.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
So, could you tell us a little bit about your Red Deer event?
Yeah, for sure. So it's called the Thanks for Farming Tour, and really our main focus is wanting to say thank you to the producers in Alberta and to give them a safe place where they can gain some knowledge, do some learning, do some networking, and see products that can help them on their farm.
And now you're doing this as other shows are canceling, but you're able to move ahead. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're able to do that?
Yeah, so, the Thanks for Farming Tour is not your regular big trade show. I mean, we do have over 70 companies that are going to be displaying products and services, and we have education sessions, but a lot of the normal big shows, there's a lot of companies, a lot of bigger companies out there that have corporate travel policies that just don't allow them to attend the shows. And really, our focus in holding this show is we're not focused on those larger companies. We're focused on innovation. We've got a ton of innovative companies, new equipment. Really the small to medium-sized businesses is really who are joining us on this tour, and they're hungry to find a way to not only say thank you to farmers, but also to be able to show off some of these products. So, the show in Alberta that canceled, AgriTrade, they didn't cancel because Alberta Health. They didn't cancel because of COVID. They canceled because they weren't able to hold what AgriTrade normally is. And we are very focused on holding a safe, smaller event that is going to allow us to thank the farmers. And, of course, we're going to be following all the guidelines from Alberta Health and really focusing on safety.
So what are some of the precautions that you're planning to take then?
Yeah, so first, right off the bat, is every single attendee has to pre-register. And that's one of the things that Alberta Health and Safety that we need is everybody to be pre-registered so we can do contact tracing if needed. Anyone that is showing any signs or symptoms of COVID will not be allowed in the show. We do have social distancing measures from the time that these attendees come into the show until they leave. We're going to be doing daily temperature checks for not only the attendees, but all of the exhibitors, all of the staff. And then we are going to be providing everybody, all attendees, all exhibitors, all staff, we're going to be providing them with a cap shield. And the cap shield is manufactured in Canada. It's approved by Health Canada for medical use and approved by Alberta Health Services specifically for our show. And what it is, people live on both sides of the fence as far as masks and how comfortable they are and how can you work a trade show in them. And we wanted to provide an alternative that could help keep our attendees safe, keep everybody safe. So, the cap shield's a big part of it. And then, of course, hand sanitizing. I mean, we've got an amazing sponsor that came on board for the cap shields, but another sponsor that came on board. And we're going to be providing every single attendee their own individual hand sanitizer bottle. We are going to have hand sanitizing stations set up throughout the show, as well as our exhibitors are going to have hand sanitizing. So, definitely taking some precautions, working very close with Alberta Health on what we need to do to be able to provide a safe place for these farmers to come and really just enjoy themselves.
And do you think farmers will attend and overcome any trepidation they might have?
Yeah, I think that's something we saw this summer. I mean, we hosted 9 events across Western Canada. And farmers came out, big time. Farmers, they want to get off the farm. They've been kind of cooped up, and every year when we get through harvest, that's when farmers really start taking some time for themselves and going to trade shows and getting off the farm. So we have no doubt, we anticipate selling out.
So it sounds like you feel like there's a fair bit of pent-up demand out there. Farmers are feeling a bit isolated and restless, maybe a little cabin fever.
Yeah, it's something we saw this summer. I mean, we had multiple farmers come up at all of our events and just thank us for giving them a safe place and a way to get off the farm. I mean, we had a farmer, you know, at one of our Manitoba events that came up in June and came to, you know, at the end of the event came up and he says, I can't tell you what this has meant to me. He said, since COVID hit, he said, I haven't visited with my neighbors. He said, as farmers, we don't pick up the phone and call each other. We get in the truck and we go visit each other. And he said, everybody's been so worried about COVID that nobody's done that. And he said, so for you to provide us an environment that is safe, where we can get together and, you know, listen to some speakers, check out some products. You know, the response this summer was amazing. And just in talking to the farmers, you know, some of the different customers that we already have in Alberta, they're really excited about coming.
And now, you had mentioned earlier that this is part of a tour. So where are the other stops going to be?
Well, we already did 9. So, you know, and the 9 that we did this summer were across. We did 3 in Alberta, 3 in Saskatchewan, and 3 in Manitoba. So we're just adding a stop, if you will, in Red Deer, and doing a lot of the things that, you know, that the farmers really enjoyed. I mean, you know, we're bringing in speakers to talk on education. We're bringing Leslie Kelly, who was a part of all 9 events this summer, who has a really powerful message on stress and mental health on the farm. And as well, on the first day, we're having a farmer roundtable. And we've got 5 farmers, you know, from across Alberta that are going to be taking part in it. And it's going to be moderated by none other than Quick Dick McDick. So some really cool things happening. And, you know, one of the things that we really focused on this summer was making sure we said thank you to the farmers and giving back. And so we're doing free lunches. Every farmer that comes gets a free lunch. Every farmer that comes gets a free beverage. And, you know, we're selling tickets, but we're not keeping any of that money. All of the proceeds from our ticket sales are going to 2 local charities in Red Deer. One of them being the Red Deer Legion, their Air Cadet program, and the other one is an amazing foundation called Smiles Through Lindsay that really is focused on mental health and providing support to the school systems in and around Red Deer. So, yeah, it's a pretty exciting time.
Well, I wish you the best of luck with it. Thanks for taking the time to tell us about it.
Oh, thank you very much, Gord. Maybe we'll see you out there.
That was Jeremy Maciszewski of Thunderstruck Agricultural Marketing telling us about their event in Red Deer in mid-November. You're listening to a special Coping with COVID edition of Between the Rows, and I'm your host this week, Gord Gilmour. Now, last but not least, we're joined by Glenn Halleck of Markets Farm, who'll tell us the latest about commodity markets. Glenn, thanks for taking the time to talk to us.
Well, thanks for having me, Gord.
So canola has been on a bit of a tear lately, it looks like to me. What can you tell us about that?
Well, it started climbing in the summer and more this October, but recently, you know, we saw a rather large jump. This past week, the November contract was up about $23 a ton. The January contract, which is now the dominant contract, came up about $17 a ton. So we're looking at canola around $5.44, $5.45 a ton right now.
And what's been going on with deliveries then? I assume that there's been lots of interest in making deliveries at these prices.
Yeah, right now there is more canola in the commercial pipeline than ever before. There's really good demand for our canola. You know, despite what, you know, we can say about China, they're not buying very much of our canola. The rest of the world wants it. Exports right now are about 2.9 million tons. Compared to this time last year, it was 2 million tons, and that was pretty good. So we did good last year. We're even doing better this year. Domestic use of canola, you know, right now it's a little bit lower than what it was this time last year. It's sitting around 2.18 million tons this year. Last year was about 2.26. So we're a little bit behind that. but producer deliveries right now, we're looking at 5 million tons so far, 11 weeks into the marketing year.
And as always, strength in canola typically reflects what's going on in the soy complex in Chicago. So what's been happening there?
Well, as much as China has a problem with Canada hurting our canola, well, through this roundabout way, China is looking for as much soybeans as it can. Right now, of course, the United States has their harvest. China is buying as much as they can handle. In fact, there's some speculation that they might be buying too much for their ports to handle. But set that aside, this Chinese demand is boosting the price of soybeans on the Chicago Board of Trade. China has this phase one trade deal that they have to buy approximately $30 billion of all sorts of ag products from the United States. Part of that is, of course, soybeans. So in this roundabout way, China buying American soybeans is helping a Canadian canola. And
what about the weather? At this time of year, I think we're typically watching what's going on in the Latin American harvests. What's got your eye there?
Yeah, there's been a lot of dryness in Brazil and Argentina. There are some concerns. They're planting right now. Brazil would usually be between 30 and 40% of their crop planted. They were sitting around 10% as of last Friday. That's not looking too good, but there is rain in the forecast, and reports say farmers believe that they'll catch up. But we have to wait and see, and we'll keep an eye on the crop reports as they come in. Brazil is hoping to have a record crop of a whopping 130 million tons of soybeans.
Well, thanks a lot, Glenn. We'll certainly keep an eye on that.
Okay, thank you, Gord.
That was Glenn Halleck of Markets Farm with the latest on commodity markets. That's another edition of Between the Rows, and I'm your host this week, Gord Gilmour, saying so long and take care of yourselves. We hope you'll join us again next week.
Between the Rows is brought to you by Smart Nutrition MAP plus MST. Experience the latest, most efficient fertilizer system for delivering sulfur and phosphate to your crops when they need it. Learn how to boost your soil's performance and maximize ROI with Smart Nutrition MAP plus MST at smartnutritionmst.com.